Ever strolled through Facebook or Instagram and seen an advertisement for, well, that thing you looked up on Google just 2 minutes earlier? Targeted advertisements are commonplace on the internet, where human behaviors and preferences can be stored and potentially sold by tech companies. Emery Rohn, an attorney at the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse in San Diego, says identity theft, data breaches, and these advertisements are among the many concerns residents have brought up.
I don't want them to have my information, and now my debit card and my social security number and my driver's license are out on the internet apparently. What do I do, and how did it get this bad?
A March ACLU poll showed 90% of voters in the state support more consumer privacy protections from online technology companies. And last year, residents got that when legislators passed the California Consumer Privacy Act. The legislation says consumers can request from certain larger businesses to know how their data is being used and ask those businesses to delete it or ask that it not be sold. Rohn calls it a landmark piece of legislation, especially in terms of the steps consumers can take to protect themselves.
Well, now, rather than saying freeze your credit or take some remedial steps to try not to be low-hanging fruit, we can say, look, why don't you go to that business, find out what information they have on you, and then take that control back.
The legislation has many businesses focusing on getting their data assets in order. But the legislation, which is still being hammered out by lawmakers, is fairly vague, says Justine Phillips, a San Diego attorney specializing in data privacy for businesses.
Until CCPA was here, this was a Wild West type world. You were allowed to amass data that was unregulated data. So really it was only financial information, health information, and very specific types of data that applied to certain companies that had regulations with respect to data. Now, the definition of personal information under California Consumer Privacy Act is really broad.
She says now businesses will have to figure out what data applies and whether they even fall under the scope of the law. For example, a business partner that's just providing software support to a larger technology company could be subject to the CCPA. And it may not be easy for the smaller business to comply.
This is going to be a trickle-down effect where the priority will be pushed down to organizations that may not just have the size to justify a large dedication of resources.
And that includes many businesses in San Diego, Phillips says. The city is home to a major tech industry. But despite the impending burden of data management businesses will have to address, consumer privacy rights attorney Emery Rohn says this is needed to happen for a while.
We have arrived at a point where consumers around the world are waking up to the realities of what it means to exist in a big data world, and they're pushing back on that.
Both of these attorneys say they believe lots of California residents will exercise their new rights under this legislation. Shalina Chatlani, KPBS News.